Um, I want to ask you, Colin, have you heard of the Greenbaum speech?
I was at the Greenbaum speech.
When it was given.
It's true?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Jeez.
So that was, I forget the exact year now. It was like late 80s.
I think it was 1992. I have it
92,
here.
yeah, 92, yeah.
So it was like a year after you. Go ahead.
Yeah, a year after I moved to Texas, yeah. So there was a conference called the Eastern Regional Conference on Multiple Personality and Dissociation, and it ran every year from the 80s into the 90s. And it was a really good conferences, lots of good talks and so on. And so there's one talk, which is going to be just a general hypnosis training talk, how to use hypnosis in the treatment of dissociative disorders. And it seemed like it would probably be approved by the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, and it'd just be kind of a regular mainstream training talk. And Corey Hammond, who's a PhD top expert in hypnosis, was the speaker. So I just thought, there's always different talks to choose from, and I thought, I'll probably go in and listen to this one. So we're all sitting in there, and then lo and behold, the talk has nothing to do with the title or the description in the program. And Corey Hammond, is describing these patients he's working with who are victims of CIA mind control programming, and they have several different levels of programming, alpha, beta, delta, gamma. He describes the characteristics of these different types of programming and different cases and so on. And he says that the lead programmer is Dr. Green, which is obviously a code name. And so then in that era, we heard from patients about Dr. Green, Dr. White, Dr. Black, sometimes Dr. Red. So there's these different mind control doctors. And the idea is that Dr. Green was actually Dr. Greenbaum, who was a psychologist or psychiatrist in the death camps, who was doing experiments on the prisoners in the death camps. And then he was recruited and brought over to the United States after World War II, and was known as Dr. Green and was the lead guy in the MK-Ultra, Bluebird, Artichoke, Manchurian candidate programs. So that sounds extremely fantastic until we find out that actually, in fact, there were mind control programs, and they did, in fact, create Manchurian candidates, and it's well described in the documents and so on. And then also we find out that there really was a Project Paperclip and some related projects where Nazi war criminals such as Werner von Braun and the rocket program people were brought over to the United States secretly because they couldn't get State Department visas because they were classified as war criminals. And so we know that MDs, rocket experts, propulsion experts, ball bearing experts, film experts of all kinds who were Nazi war criminals were brought over to the U.S. and inserted into the military and the private sector. And that includes a physician named Hubertus Strucold, who people he reported to and people who reported to him were tried and convicted at Nuremberg. He was briefly questioned, but never even questioned at length by the U.S. interrogators, was brought over through Project Paperclip, and is regarded as the father of aviation medicine, and has a library named after him at one of the San Antonio Air Force bases. And his experiments included things like putting people in chambers and dropping the air pressure to the equivalent of 60,000 feet, which caused them to die extremely agonizing death in a few minutes, and then cutting their heads open underwater to see if there was air bubbles in their cerebral arteries. So
yeah, I remember those.
All these guys are documented. The only people missing from the documentation about who was brought over under Project Paperclip is the psychiatrist. So I would say it's almost for certain that somebody was brought over who is a Greenbaum type figure, whether he was actually named Greenbaum or not.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I find interesting is there were all these rumors of Nazi obsession with the occult, There's all those rumors.
Those are not just rumors. There's lots of documentation on them.
Right. They were obsessed with the occult. And then you have all of these Nazi doctors that come over. And then you have all of these reports of satanic ritual abuse with people, and it's always kind of connected with these Manchurian Candidate kind of programs, this mind programming, you know?
Right.
And I always thought that it was a little bit convenient that the Nazi doctors brought over, and then there's this satanic ritual kind of thing. And there's really kind of there's rumors. I mean, I say rumors because there's never any, what I feel, concrete evidence for the most part, of like a rampant kind of almost satanic or occult kind of cult inside of like the military and military intelligence, you know, people who are like avowed members of like the Church of Satanism in California, kind of stuff like that, you know. So there's all these interesting rumors, and I just think that it's very convenient, you know, all these Nazi doctors come over, and then you see all of these reports of satanic ritual abuse that look suspiciously like mind programming kind of experiments, and all these child pedophilia rings and all this different stuff.
Well, something that ties into that, Colin, is
it's a huge. Actually, the John Travolta movie, The General's Daughter, just peeked into the edge of that a little bit. Yeah. So it's either just a huge, crazy fantasy cooked up by some mentally ill people, or it's this very deeply embedded network of cross relationships and cross connections that's very well protected and controlled.
What's the reference in your book, The CIA Doctors, to the Scottish Rite and the psychiatrists being associated with the Scottish Rite conferences and Scottish Rite Association?
Well, the Scottish Rite equals the Masons.
Exactly.
And,
what is in the middle of it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have the answer why they're there, but in your book. This is all documents. So you can find many of the LSD experiments where there's funding by MKUltra either directly to the same doctor, funneled through the public health service by different routes. And then there's cross-funding of the same network of LSD experiments by the Scottish Rite Foundation and sponsoring of major LSD conferences. That's a fact.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys are 33rd degree Masons.
It's crazy.
And you have a tentative explanation in your book, or you write, so I'll quote you. Although the Masons are not implicated as an organization in CIA and military mind control, connections in a network of doctors were maintained in part through high rank in the Masons.
Right, exactly.
So,
which is sort of like pedophiles in the Catholic Church, except the Catholic Church is implicated in the cover-up.
Yeah. So we didn't get a chance to really go through all of the MKUltra history, or the Manchurian Candidate history and all of that kind of stuff. But
they need to read the book.
Yeah, but suffice to say that the CIA, etc., U.S. intel agencies have spent a long time and a lot of energy and effort and money into finding out how best to basically create a mind-controlled human being.
Right.
And my question is, assuming that they've got it down to a fine art after, 60 years or more, what's the point? What do they want these people for?
Well, I'm glad you're asking questions that I don't know all the answers to here. But as far as I can figure it out, the whole idea that you're going to get somebody, turn them into a Manchurian Candidate, so they would do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do, to me that's just a big red herring. If you want somebody to go and become a serial killer, well, all you do is put them through basic training and send them off to a combat zone, but they're not serial killers because they're killing the bad guys. So taking an ordinary guy off the street and turning him into somebody who kills multiple people, there's nothing mysterious about that, and you don't need codes mind control beyond just sort of like basic training level mind control. So, and if you want somebody to be a spy, you just recruit them and train them.
Yeah.
Or deliver documents or whatever. So to me, the rationale's got to be the amnesia. And the only thing that makes sense to me is it's all about resisting interrogation. That when the interrogators capture somebody, they're grilling the guy out front, and there's so many barriers and hypnotic codes and access codes put in there that the interrogators can't get through to the real information. And in the CIA documents, it describes efforts to detect Manchurian Candidates being run at the U.S. by foreign intelligence agencies. So they're clearly working on both sides of it.
So
to me, that's the only. Otherwise, I don't see any purpose other than just, the thrill of monkeying around with people's minds and doing stuff.
So it was essentially a military, government, CIA, intel application.
Yeah.
That was the original idea.
Colin, I have a question along
Okay.
Joe's question. In one of the YouTube video where you participated, you mentioned personalized mind control that is described in most MK Ultra projects, where basically you have one psychiatrist behind one patient for a month doing an individualized brainwashing, let's call it this way.
Right.
But you also mentioned generalized mind control, and you list some tools that are being used, like disinformation, misinformation, TV. Today, in 2013, could you evaluate the extent of the generalized mind control? And I was thinking about other factors beyond the three ones you listed, like what is put in food, in water, in the air we breathe. I was even thinking about HARP, that is, because you list in a CIA doctor some mind control tools using waves, sound waves and electromagnetic waves, and I wanted to know your take on it.
Well, that's an area of interest of mine because I actually have a patent that's in kind of that general area, not to use it as a military weapon. But, so I'm interested in electromagnetic energy, and I've got a whole model for, I think a lot of the control signals inside our bodies are actually at the electromagnetic level, not at the biological level. And I think of human beings as being basic, and mammals in general, kind of like biological cell phones. We're emitting signals into the environment all the time and receiving signals from the environment all the time. And it's not just background noise, it's really built into evolution. And it, in the way back 10,000 years ago, would have been used for tracking game by paranormal means, but it's really electromagnetic signaling. So I got a whole model about that. And in the MK Ultra documents, it describes sound energy and electromagnetic energy being beamed at people's brains and experimental monkey brains to knock them out, confuse them, change their mental state and behavior. In U.S. News and World Report, early in the 21st century, I forget the exact year, there's an article called Wonder Weapons, and it describes the contractor is Sandia Labs in New Mexico, if I remember right. It says what Air Force aircraft it was. It says what the specs of the machine are, the type of electromagnetic beam that it emits, the altitude of the plane, how far into the skin of the target it penetrates. So these weapons exist for a fact, and you can see pictures of Marine Corps vehicles with weapons mounted on them on Wikipedia. So there's no doubt that this technology exists. And HARP is High Altitude Auroral Research Project that's based in Alaska. Jesse Ventura Conspiracy Theory Program did an episode on it. And from what we're told, it's kind of weather control, maybe weaponized earthquakes, communication signals with submarines, stuff like that. Yeah, and so you've got the crazy tinfoil hat crowd who says that the CIA is beaming electric energy at them. Well, some of those people probably are delusional, but not necessarily all, because these weapons definitely exist. And if we know for a fact that radiation, chemical weapons, biological weapons, LSD were tested on unwitting civilians, I would say the odds are low that these kind of electromagnetic weapons have never been tested on unwitting civilians. And there's you can go to the U.S. Patent Office website and see patents in this area for beaming electromagnetic energy at people's minds, at their heads, to modify their mental state, even insert sounds, voice, and language. So this stuff is right there in the public domain, and the U.S. government has already reviewed it and is aware of it.